Bats belong to the order Chiroptera. Does anybody know what the word Chiroptera means in Greek? Yes, you got it. So, click here. So hand wing is the answer. So bat wings, if you can see in this image, they're essentially modified hands that have evolved from forelimbs that provides them with really unique flight capabilities, which is really distinct from other flying animals. These evolutionary processes really involve that gradual lengthening of the finger bones, and you can see that in the image here with those fingers stretched out between that skin membrane. And then we see this development of this really large wing membrane, and that's called the patagium. So this is a thin elastic membrane that's composed with skin and muscles and blood vessels and nerves. So they've got a lot of dexterity and sensory capabilities in their structure. And so that allows them to have a lot of distinct capabilities in their flight maneuverability. And when you watch a bat fly, you can kind of see that as they're able to twist and move these wings into really unique positions. Does anybody know why some bat guano sparkles? Feel free to call out a guess.
Exoskeleton.
Good guess. It is due to insect exoskeletons. So bat poop is also referred to as guano, and this is a word that originates from the Andean indigenous language Quechua, and it really refers to any form of animal dung that's used as fertilizer. So if you guys ever see small animal droppings, like in your attic or on the edges of your house, you can actually kind of squish it up a little bit. You want to make sure you wear gloves when you do this. But if you hold it up to the light, if it appears dull, that likely came from a mouse or another small rodent. But if it kind of glitters in the light and it sparkles, then it's likely bat poop. And that's because bats are not able to digest the shiny, hard outer exoskeletons of insects, which results in the shimmery poop. These insect exoskeletons are really rich in nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, all of which are really important in plant growth, and that's why it makes guano a really excellent fertilizer. Does anyone know what a baby bat is called? Good, yes, y'all got it. So most small mammals actually have pretty short gestation periods, but in contrast, bats actually have really long pregnancies. And comparatively, baby bats are pretty big. For some species of bats, these newborns can actually weigh up to 43% of the mother's body weight. Wow. It's pretty staggering. So but most bats have how many pups in a year?
2.
4? You guys are close. You're in the right range. Trick question, but the answer is just 1. So most bat mothers only give birth to a single pup in a year, but some species will have multiple births. This can be 2, 3, 4 offspring. Twins are actually pretty common in a lot of species like eastern red bats, which is a common species that we have here in Virginia. So you can see bats kind of hanging upside down in their roosts. The mother bats actually give birth upside down, and these young offspring are born hairless and with their eyes closed. And so these bat infants then crawl to their mother's nipples and attach themselves and feed because bats produce milk just like other mammals do. In many bat species, these females will actually gather in pretty large colonies to give birth, and these are called maternity colonies or nurseries. And this really helps these pups to keep warm and ward off predators together. It's kind of a collective group care effort. And the mothers are actually able to recognize their young because these offspring have unique vocalizations, sense, and they also just have really good spatial memory. So even in these really big colonies, they can figure out who their own offspring are. Wow. So during the really early stages of infancy, these babies will actually ride along with their mothers when they hunt or forage for food. And during that flight process, the bat babies will hold on to their mothers with everything they've got. So that's sharp claws, their teeth, they hang on tight. And once those baby bats have grown more to be able to roost on their own, the mothers do leave them in the roost to fly off on their own to feed, but they might have to return several times throughout the night to feed them. So which of these crops is not pollinated by bats?
Cereal crops.
Great guess. It is cereal crops. So cereal crops, examples like corn, wheat, rice, barley, oats, all of these are wind pollinated, but all of these other crops that we have listed here are pollinated by nectar feeding bats. So for example, there's a couple pollinating bat species like the Mexican long-nosed bat or the lesser long-nosed bat that rely really heavily on agave nectar, and they are the primary pollinators for agave and saguaro cacti. These pregnant bats actually need the nectar from agave plants to be able to make their long annual migratory journeys between central Mexico and the United States, kind of the desert Southwest, to give birth just to a single pup. And so these agaves and other plants depend on these migratory bats to pick up the pollen as they drink that nectar and then spread that to disperse that pollen to propagate new plants. So I like to tell people, if you enjoy margaritas with your tacos, you can thank the bat for that. And they actually do make bat-friendly tequila, so I encourage you guys to look that up if you're interested in that. It's really cool to learn about.
Yeah.
So insectivorous bats can consume up to what % of their body weight in insects each night?
50 to 70.
Trick question. Sorry to throw that at y'all, but it's 30 to 50 generally. Most bats can eat up to half their body weight in insects, but pregnant and nursing mothers can actually eat up to 100% of their body weight each night. So they really need that energy, especially during that critical period. So aside from bats, how many other species of mammals are capable of true flight?
Zero.
You got it. That was also a trick question. 0. So bats are the only mammals that are capable of true flight. Like humans, bats belong to the class Mammalia. So again, that means they bear live young, they feed their young milk, they grow hair. But bats are really unique members of this class, and that's because they're the only mammals capable of sustained flight. So if you guys are familiar with flying squirrels, that's not true flight. That's actually a different adaptation called gliding or scansorial locomotion. So bats make up what % of mammalian species globally?
10%.
It's actually higher. It is 20%. So bats, like I said, belong to the order Chiroptera, and that's the second largest order of mammals, followed by rodents. So rodents are the largest, and then we have bats. So that is a huge amount of species diversity globally. So while we're on that topic, how many species of bats exist globally?
Wow.
A lot.
It's a staggering number, I'll tell you that.
It's a rhinoceros spotter.
100.
Oh, go way up.
1,000.
More than 1,000.
Wow.
It is 1,500. So the 1,500 bat species was actually just discovered last year. And just to give you guys kind of a picture of what this diversity looks like globally, the world's smallest bat is the bumblebee bat, and this little guy measures up to 2 inches in length and it weighs about 2 grams as an adult. Whereas the world's largest bat, which is the golden crowned flying fox, has a wingspan up to 6 feet wide. So stacks diversity in size worldwide. Guess how fast the world's fastest bat can travel? 100 miles an hour. And that is the Mexican free-tailed bat. And we actually get those incidentally here in Virginia. So when we think about bat diversity globally, scientists can kind of divide these into kind of 2 major broad categories. And these are the Megachiroptera and the Microchiroptera. So the Megachiroptera are going to be like your fruit-eating bats, the flying foxes. These are generally found in like Southeast Asia, Australia, the Southwest Pacific. You can actually see one of those guys kind of in the bottom row, the second from the left. But you can see that these guys have relatively bigger eyes, but smaller ears proportionally to their head shape. They kind of have like dog-like faces. I always think my dog kind of looks like one of these guys. And they're really important in seed dispersal because a lot of these bats are fruit eating, so they're helping to disperse seeds globally. This is in contrast to the group that we call the Microchiroptera. And so these are made up of like the insect-eating bats and the nectarivores, and they make up the majority of bats that we have here in North America. They tend to have really small eyes, but actually large ears. So a lot of the other images that you're seeing here in proportion to their heads, they kind of have like pug-like faces. They're really small guys. And a lot of these bats are insectivorous and will use echolocation to find their prey, which we're going to talk a lot more about that. But we also see other diet strategies like feeding on nectar, blood, fish, frogs. There's a lot of diversity in bat diets. So So I want to spend a second here just to talk about some common bat myths that I often hear a lot. So one myth is that bats are really just flying mice. This is not true. They are in two completely different orders. So even though bats may look really small like rodents, they're super different, very different natural histories. Some bats can actually live up to 35 years compared to many rodents, which may only live like 1 or 2 years. So big difference in their lifespans. Another myth that I hear often is that bats are blind. Not true at all. Bats can actually see as well as humans can, but they have evolved that sophisticated method of using sound that enables them to navigate their environment and find food and move around, find objects. So we'll talk more about this process.
Is that pollen all over there?
It is. It's covered in pollen. I really love that photo. Another myth is that all bats have rabies. Not true. So actually less than 1% of bats have rabies. So with other mammals, you're more likely to find rabies incidences in raccoons, skunks, foxes, other wild mammals. They have higher rates of that virus prevalence. But it has been shown that bats that do act strangely or have odd contact with humans are probably more likely to be carrying the virus. So humans can get exposure to rabies through bat saliva, and that's through bites or scratches, but this is 100% preventable with humans if you're able to get medical care. But otherwise, it's almost always fatal if it's left untreated. So just wanted to clear that up, but it's actually a really small percentage of bats that have rabies. A lot of folks will think that, during the winter months, we might see a bat come out and fly out in the evening. You haven't seen them in months, it feels a little weird. That's honestly just them taking advantage of kind of an opportunistically warm night to come out and forage. So seeing bats come out on a warm winter evening is not uncommon, not an indicator of rabies. So just something good to keep in mind this time of year. I love this photo too. Another common myth is that bats suck human blood. True. Vampire bats are the only bats that feed on blood. And of those 1,500 species that we have globally, there are only 3 species of vampire bats that drink blood. This feeding strategy is called hematophagy. And so these bats are going to be feeding on animals like cows, pigs, horses. And what they're doing is they're making a small cut with their teeth and then kind of lapping up the blood with their tongues. It's also on like the leg of the animal. But sometimes these bites and the bats themselves are just so lightweight and peaceful that they can be feeding on the blood of the animal for a half hour or more, and it really doesn't disturb them. So I just wanted to clear that up. It's not every bat sucking blood. So I mentioned that we just had a new bat species discovered last year. This was really cool. In 2025, there was a PhD student who discovered the 1,500 species on Bioko Island in Africa's Equatorial Guinea. And so this was called the Pipistrellus atula. And what's really neat is the word atula means island or god of the island in the local Bantu language. So it's kind of an honor to the culture that which that was found. So a lot of bat diversity out there. Here in North America, we actually have 48 different species of bats that have been documented. We have 19 that occur in the eastern United States, and 17 have actually been documented here in Virginia. So I want to talk briefly about the ways we can kind of think of Virginia's bats into kind of 2 major guilds. We can kind of break these down into cave bats and tree bats. So tree bats are typically spending their winter months hibernating in cavities in trees. Additionally, they can be found like in wood piles, under loose rock and rock crevices, sometimes in caves. Whereas in contrast, cave bats, as their name implies, hibernate in caves, sometimes in like abandoned mines. And depending on the species, they're either going to form large clusters, these large colonies together, or they hibernate individually or in small groups. So that really varies a lot by species. Just some morphological differences between these guilds. You can see that tree bats, like our eastern red bat there on the left, tend to have a fully furred tail, whereas cave bats have a naked tail. So what that's doing for the tree bats is they're able to kind of wrap that around themselves like a blanket, and it keeps them warm and kind of safe from that exposure during the winter time. So here we see an example of a colony. So you can see these bigger clusters of cave roosting bats, especially during the winter hibernation period. In the summer, these female cave bats will form small maternity colonies, like we talked about before. They're kind of colonially roosting or raising their young together. This is often under like loose tree bark or inside of a tree cavity. Whereas in contrast, when we think of tree bats like the eastern red bat or the hoary bat, they're going to be raising their young independently, and they often hang in foliage in trees, like in a clump of leaves upside down for their roosting strategy. There's also some differences in how many young they have. Tree bats typically have twins, whereas these cave bats usually just produce one offspring per year. So has anyone been to Bracken Cave near San Antonio, Texas? I bet that was a pretty cool experience. I have never been. It's on my bucket list, but I'd love to visit one day. So for folks who aren't familiar with this cave system, this is the summer home to more than 15 million Mexican three-tailed bats. So this is a maternity colony, and it's actually the world's largest bat colony. And it's also one of the world's just largest concentrations of mammals here on Earth. So what these bats are doing, they're overwintering in like Mexico and Central and South America, but then the females come back up and return to this cave to produce millions of offspring every year, whereas the males are kind of roosting off on their own in smaller groups. But so in the later part of June, these females are going to give birth to a single pup, and that effectively doubles the size of the cave's population each year. So the young bats are going to become independent. They're feeding on insects with their parents. Then they're weaned. They have higher energy demands, and that forces their mothers to consume, again, that like 100% of their body weight each night. So this would be an incredible experience to see. It is kind of a tourist attraction. I know I've seen this. So if you ever have a chance to go down and witness this, it would be a pretty incredible experience to see that sheer number of bats coming out. So I want to talk for a few minutes about the ecological role of bats. This is really important because bats provide numerous ecosystem services that they often don't get a lot of credit for, right? So scientists actually estimate that insectivorous bats save U.S. farmers roughly $23 billion each year by reducing crop damage and reducing the need for pesticide application. In other parts of the world outside of the US, we see bats being really critical seed dispersers and pollinators of different plant populations, not to mention that they serve as important prey items for other animals in the food chain. So what animals eat bats? A lot of owl species are actually known to predate on bats, but a lot of times this is more kind of bats are targeted opportunistically by a lot of these species rather than being a main food source. I've seen some research articles where birds like Chuck-Will's widows, if you're familiar with that species, these are birds that typically eat like bugs, other insects, moths. They'll sometimes swallow whole birds, and that includes bats as well. There's actually a bat species called the spectral bat, and I think I have a photo of it in a minute, that's found typically in like Mexico and South America that normally hunts birds. Sometimes these are actually larger birds like parrots. But when a spectral bat encounters its prey, it'll spin and get the whole bird wings. And this actually happens with cats as well. So the spectral bat has been shown
Anyway,
to distress calls.
so would you be available like in 45 minutes?
Yeah, sure. I actually thought about 5:20, but just we're there. So.
If you could, I need to put some things up on some upper shelves.
Yeah, okay. There's no rush. I'm here now, so you can call me when you're all done. You can give me a call and I'll come down.
All right. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, bye-bye.
Okay.
Oh, well, maybe uncheck that. Yeah, uncheck that. Then we'll
yeah.
Yes, there we go.
Here we go.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Lady was
So if you didn't quite catch that, moral of the story is a lot of different animals will eat bats, including bats themselves. Try to advance here. There we go. So like I mentioned before, bat diets are highly varied. We see them eating fish, fruit, nectar, sometimes amphibians, lizards, sometimes birds. This article actually came out pretty recently. This was published in the fall of last year. And so the greater noctule bat is the largest species of bat in Europe. And it was for the first time documented as catching a bird in midair and then eating it in flight. So this was the first time that scientists had actually documented a bat preying on a bird at high altitude and then consuming them literally on the wing in the air. So really, really cool adaptations. Let's talk about insectivorous bats because that's what we have here in Virginia. So a lot of insectivorous bats, their diets are consisting of a lot of flies, a lot of moths, a lot of beetles, a lot of mosquitoes, which is great. We love that. So a lot of these are agricultural pests. Like we mentioned, it's saving a lot of money with crop loss. And so bats are able to locate and capture these insect prey through that adaptation called echolocation. And so through this process, bats are emitting ultrasonic calls through their mouth or through their nose. And these echolocation pulses are bouncing off of objects and returning important information to the bat. And we're going to get more in deep with this process in a bit. Do you think it's really important to talk about some bat conservation challenges? So bats face a lot of threats, unfortunately, and we have seen drastic population declines in the last few decades. Aside from white nose syndrome, which we'll talk about in a second, bats also face a lot of environmental habitat threats as well. So this includes the installation of wind turbine systems, so it's the speed of the rotating blades. I think some research has shown that bats mistake these for like trees and other roosting structures. So there's a lot of direct collisions, a lot of direct mortality with wind turbines. Also just habitat loss and fragmentation really contribute to population declines, as well as pesticide exposure and contamination between cave systems, which a lot of bats depend on for their winter hibernacula. This is kind of a sobering slide, but I do want to talk about white nose syndrome because it is important when we talk about bat conservation. So if you haven't heard of white nose syndrome, this is a fatal fungal disease that came to the United States in New York in 2006. So we've had it here for almost 2 decades. And so this condition has caused massive population declines. Some Virginia bats, we've lost almost 90% of their population since then. And what this is it's a fatal fungus that you can see in this image. It grows on kind of the muzzle, the wing membranes of these bats. What it causes is when these bats should be hibernating, they're in a reduced metabolic state, they're in torpor. It's causing them to get irritated when they feel that fungal growth, and it causes them to wake up and then go out and fly, and they use up their energy during these, harsher, cold winter months. And so we're seeing mortality essentially due to emaciation because of this fungus. And this has spread significantly across the United States and Canada. So since it was first introduced in 2006, it's now been documented for my most up-to-date math in 35 states and 7 Canadian provinces. 12 North American bat species have been documented as having this fungus. So there's a lot to be concerned about here, and it's a big focus of research in bat ecology these days. But there are some hopeful things. I mean, some bats have shown some natural resistance to this fungus, and a lot of research is going into that. I do want to take a second to talk about some of the treatment options that are happening. I'm going to talk through these. So if you want to learn more about what treatment options are currently being explored to combat white nose syndrome, I encourage you guys to check out the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website, which is where I obtained this information from. But a lot of this research is currently emerging. So a lot of this is brand new. But scientists are looking into options for orally vaccinating bats before that hibernation period. And so what that looks like is doing mass application through an aerosol spray onto colonies of roosting bats, and they actually ingest this as they groom themselves. Another option is the use of UVC light. And so this is used to illuminate the walls of a cave, to sanitize the surfaces through low doses of radiation before the bats actually arrive to that system for hibernation. There's also been some research into probiotics, which is being developed to strengthen the bat's natural skin microbiomes to slow that fungal growth. So what they're doing is they're combining these freeze-dried beneficial bacteria with clay powder and using compressed air to kind of blow it into like a bat box. And so that's at night when the bats are away. And so when the bats return, that probiotic-laden dust kind of covers their bodies and their wings. We also see some research in volatile organic compounds. So these antifungal properties of these compounds are being aerosolized and used to fog up bat hibernacula. I also want to mention, I think this is pretty interesting, that researchers are attesting the effectiveness of lowering hibernacula temperatures. So this is the temperature in these cave or mine systems below the range where the fungus grows best. And I think this is around like 40 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the idea here isn't to kind of cool down all the caves to a really cool temperature, but possibly this helps direct conservation initiatives. You know, maybe there are some cave systems that are more important to prioritize if they naturally have these cooler areas, which could make it less susceptible for the fungus to grow and spread. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience surveying bats and what we're doing to study bats, both through mist netting and through acoustics. So these are some photos from some former mist netting surveys that I've had a chance to lead. These are some outreach events that we did in Washington, D.C. with the public. So they're very rewarding to give folks a chance to see these animals up close. So some of the equipment that we're able to use to actually physically capture bats include trap systems like a harp trap. This is something that biologists would use at kind of like a focal exit point. So these are really good for like cave exits or for maybe you have a big colony of bats in a barn. So you've got kind of one central opening where a lot of bats are funneling through. And it's a little bit hard to see in this image, but what you're looking at is this setup that has kind of vertical rungs and they're a little bit offset from each other. So when a bat goes to fly through that framework, it kind of gets stuck in there and then drops down into that soft canvas in the bottom. And then biologists can reach in there to extract the bat to do whatever type of measurements they need, put a GPS tracker on it, that type of thing. We also use something called a mist net, and mist netting is often used in bird surveys as well, if anyone has had a chance to see those. The net material is actually pretty similar to what bat biologists use. So these are made of really, really fine material, polyester or nylon netting. These net openings are only like a square inch in size. And so you see here, this is kind of in the daylight, but they form these kind of different tiers in the net. And so these mist nets will be established on flight corridors for bats. So we'll look at areas like maybe they're all emerging from the woods and they go down a trail corridor that's got like a covered canopy. So it's all kind of funneling them through that area. And so that's a really optimal spot to stretch a mist net up across because you're catching bats during their typical flight path. Other areas are like along wooded edges or other just typical flight corridors. And what we're able to do is the bat will fly into the net, it gets stuck, and then researchers will be able to extract the bat safely. This is done really carefully. I wanted to share these photos. This is the first time I ever extracted a bat out of a mist net and learned how to handle it. What I'm holding here is an eastern red bat, and this is in southeastern Virginia. You can see in that image on the left and on the right, actually, that I'm wearing 2 layers of gloves. So we will use batting gloves essentially, so really thick gloves. Sometimes they'll have like a leather tip, kind of like double layered, and then we also wear latex gloves on top of that. And those are changed out in between every time we are handling a new bat, and that's to help prevent disease spread. So these are just some more images from bats that I've extracted from mist nets. We're looking at northern long-eared bats, which is a listed species, and a big brown bat that is on the top right, taking a chomp out of my finger. And they when they're not happy. So it does help to have 2 layers of gloves on for our protection and for theirs. Sometimes with mist netting, you do get bycatch. This happens. So doing mist netting at night, we often get a lot of nocturnal insects. We've caught whippoorwills in our nets. We've caught a kingfisher over a stream before it got dark. So this happens sometimes with these physical surveys, and the idea here is to quickly release the animal as fast as you can, especially if it's a non-target species that you're not intending to work with. So some of the reasons that we might need to physically capture these bats to take different measurements, there's a lot of different reasons. The one thing that we're doing here in these photos is looking at the wing condition, which can be an indicator of exposure to white nose syndrome. It's not always displaying as that kind of fuzzy fungal growth on the muzzle. Sometimes it displays as like wing scarring, which we can check for. We take different measurements on the body. What I'm doing in the right image here is shining a light up underneath the finger bones. And that's a good way to actually get the age of a bat. So what we're looking at is the cartilage between the finger joints. And if you see light shining through that, that means that that cartilage has not fully ossified, it's not fully developed. And so that tells us that it's likely a juvenile bat, whereas in an adult, you're not going to have that light shining through. So we talked a bit about bat wing anatomy. I mean, we're seeing here kind of in comparison, the difference is compared to like birds or humans, and you're really seeing those elongated finger bones, which give them a lot of dexterity in their flight. It gives them a lot of sensory feedback, a lot of versatility. They can move in a lot of unique directions. And so this can be pretty important when you think about their prey. I mean, they are trying to quickly go after insect prey that are often flying very fast. Sometimes they're foraging in very cluttered environments in the middle of the woods. So they have to have that dexterity to be able to move around quickly and move their wings independently. Sometimes biologists will need to physically capture bats because they want to do radiotelemetry with them. So these are some images of bats that we have tagged and banded because they are of high conservation concern. So what you're seeing here is a federal armband that has a unique identification number. And so that's designed to stay on permanently. And so if another biologist was ever able to recapture that bat, it gives us some information about the movement ecology of these species. What you're seeing here in the middle image is of a radio transmitter. And so this is really cool. You can see that long antenna kind of coming off of its back. What we've done is we've trimmed the bat's fur down on its back, and we actually used like eyelash glue from the drugstore to glue down that radio transmitter to affix it to the bat. And that's going to put off location signals to somebody with a receiver. This antenna is not designed to stay on forever. They only stay on, honestly, about a couple weeks before they fall off naturally. And so you only have kind of a small window of time to be able to track that bat back to its roost location. But that's really important to be able to drive conservation decision making, right? So this image that you see on the right here is the location of a tree cavity where we tracked one of our bats back to. I'll show another image. So this is a funky bat species. If you guys haven't heard of this guy before, this is a Rappahannock big-eared bat. So kind of similar to the Virginia big-eared bat, but these guys are found more in like southeastern Virginia. And they have these really funky big ears that kind of curl down sometimes. And when they get all kind of act up or kind of agitated, they unfurl and kind of look like big donkey ears. So they're really fun bats to work with. But what we did, this is me shining kind of a light up into that tree cavity. And so here you can kind of see the little bunny ears of that bat roosting upside down. But it was really cool to be able to track that bat species back to the tree that it's using for its summer roost, because that can inform a lot of habitat protection and conservation decision making. So it's really great when that works out and you're able to find it during that short period.
What happened to the wing thumb? Last.
Could you repeat the question for the people who zoomed in, please?
What happened to the wing thumb on the last?
Could you help me back up, Bob?
You see it there on the four protrusions. Pardon me?
The photo's a bit cut off, so we're looking at its two legs and then the arms, but we're not seeing the fingers yet. So what you're seeing right there is the upper arm and the forearm, but we're not seeing the full wing yet.
What are those four protrusions at the bottom?
Oh, it's toes.
Pardon me?
It's toes.
Toes. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So you can kind of see the claws on them as well. So they're a little demonic looking, but they're really fun guys. Great question. Thank you. So in addition to needing to handle bats physically, a lot of scientists actually focus on a different field, and that's bioacoustics. And that's something that I'm really interested in studying with Virginia's bats. So I want to talk for a bit about how we do this, because this is a really cool process. So not all bats actually echolocate. Worldwide, only about 70% of the species that we have do. And so what this echolocation is they're emitting super high frequency pulses through their mouth or through their nose, and then they're listening to the returning echo as it bounces off of objects. So through that process, it sounds pretty simple, but they can actually get a lot of information from these pulses. So they can get the size, the shape, the texture of all the objects in its environment. So what these bats are doing, they're contracting their larynx, so that's their voice box. Some species will actually click their tongues to make these pulses. And these sounds are generally emitted through the mouth. Some of them do it through their nostrils, but all of Virginia's bats use this process to navigate their environment and find food. So these echolocation calls are what we call in the ultrasonic range. So they typically range from like 20 to 200 kilohertz. Human hearing kind of tops out around 20 kilohertz. So these are way above the range of human hearing. In terms of how loud these calls are, these can be as low as 50 decibels and up to 120 decibels. So I've heard this is kind of like having a smoke detector going off like right next to your ear. It's super duper loud, but because those frequencies are so high in the ultrasonic range, it's beyond the range of human hearing. So with bats, each time they produce one of these calls, a small muscle in their ear actually contracts to prevent the bat from hearing its own call, because that kind of messes with hearing the echo. And as they are kind of honing in on a prey object, if they're chasing a moth, it's going to increase the number of pulses, how rapidly it's putting them out as they get closer and closer to the prey, to give them really detailed information on where that object is. So when we look at bat echolocation calls, we are displaying them on something called a spectrogram. Is anybody familiar with spectrograms? This can be used in a lot of bioacoustic analyses, not just for bats. But what you're looking at here is these bat call pulses. So every one of these little squiggles is another bat call pulse. And when we map this out on a spectrogram, it can kind of show us the shape of these individual bat calls. So we're seeing the loudness, the intensity, kind of where the colors get more red, like the warm colors. And so this is showing the frequency range over time, how powerful it is. And all of this is happening within a span of like milliseconds. It's incredibly fast. But what's really cool about those, actually, I'm going to back out. Can you help me back up one more? I'm not sure how to do that. Thank you. What's really cool about these is that these call pulses are unique to the individual species. So having that little squiggle in a certain frequency range with a certain kind of power distribution, that's unique to the individual bat species. So that's how scientists can use this technology to identify bats without ever having to physically capture and handle it. So I want to talk for a second about the Virginia Working Landscapes program as I kind of tie all this back into the work that our team has started with bat bioacoustics. If you're not familiar with VWL, we're based, again, just like 20 minutes north up the road. And we are a program that brings together scientists, private landowners, a lot of community volunteers, other regional partners, nonprofits. And we all work together to promote the conservation of native biodiversity and promoting sustainable land management. So what's really cool is being part of this, globally recognized institution. This program that I'm a part of is really giving us a platform to kind of bridge that extensive science of the Smithsonian with on-the-ground conservation here in our local communities. So something that we started in the last couple of years is thinking about and working with the landowners in our community and the ways that working landscapes are impacting conservation efforts. So with the support of the Rains Family Foundation, with White House Farm Foundation, and the Band Foundation, the Virginia Working Landscapes team piloted a study last summer, actually. So this is brand new research, where we are researching how working landscapes are supporting bat conservation in Virginia. So we're working so far with just a small group of landowners to look at bat activity levels in grassland habitat here in our region. A lot of the folks that we worked with in the last year are actually based here in Rappahannock County. So a lot of this research that you'll see tonight is very, very local to where we are. And what we're doing is we're measuring bat activity through bioacoustics in these fields, and then comparing that data with metrics from like the overall field composition, how diverse the vegetation is, how the land management is impacting activity, and also just thinking about the overall landscape as a whole, how contiguous that landscape is there a lot of diversity across the whole habitat? And the idea is that we're going to take the findings that we use from this research to help inform new best management practices for landowners to be able to support conservation efforts on these working lands. So what you see here are images of us deploying these bat detectors in the field. We used the Wildlife Acoustics brand, the song meter mini bats. We're getting another type of song meter device this year. And so these are really cool passive recording devices that we can elevate onto a pole that's 3 meters at least up in the air. So we really got to get above the tall vegetation. And these devices are programmed to just operate remotely each night. So they turn on 30 minutes before sunset and then stay on until 30 minutes after sunrise. So we're capturing all the bat activity with all the peaks throughout the whole nightly foraging period. So I want to show, I hope this animation works. I'm going to click on it. This is what this looks like. We have an in-house scientific illustrator who illustrated what this looks like in the field. And you can see our monitoring device in the center of the field and bats foraging around it. And so this device is capturing those echolocation pulses. So we're able to see what that community composition looks like. I love this animation. I think I've played it for fun just 100 times, clicking it over and over again. But that's kind of what it looks like in practice. Let's see if I can advance here. So then comes all the data analysis. So we looked at an example of the spectrogram before. This involves a lot of hours in front of the computer looking at these individual spectrograms. What helps is actually using a program that can run a lot of these call files through for you, and then it provides its best guess of these species auto classifications. But with this technology, you really do need a trained biologist to come in behind the program afterwards and manually vet all of these species identifications. So I took a lot of training and learned how to manually identify a lot of these calls. And it was a fun process for me. And if anybody really wants to talk about the nitty-gritty of that idea, I'd love to sit down with you sometime and talk about it. But just in our first season of data collection, we got a surprisingly large diversity of bats, many of them here in Rappahannock County. So we have several of our tree roosting bats, several of our cave roosting bats. A lot of them we have, again, our in-house illustrator did some really awesome headshots of these species that you see on the right here. One of them that I was particularly excited to record was a Mexican free-tailed bat. Remember, those are the ones that are formed as huge colonies like at Bracken Cave. This species is typically a southern species, but we're seeing range expansion. So we're starting to see them incidentally here in Virginia. So we did get that recorded at a couple sites here in Rappahannock County. But again, about just the sheer population declines, it is very just inspiring to be able to see the recordings of some of these species of very high conservation concern. So things like the tricolored bat is a listed species. Also, species belong to the genus Myotis. I don't have that shown here, but we did get several Myotis recordings. So that's always really fun to see these species are still around, even though we know they're in very low numbers. Again, that's the spectrogram of bat in the genus Myotis. So there's some kind of cool call characteristics that you know you're looking at a Myotis species from looking at that. One example of kind of the way we're looking at this data, this was from one of our study sites here in Rappahannock County, where we studied 2 different fields that are managed a little bit differently. They kind of have different vegetation communities. And so what we're seeing here is a plot of bat activity levels throughout our full monitoring period. So we're looking at how many times they pass by that microphone throughout the night. But what's cool is when we pair this with our plant survey data, we're able to make relationships between the diversity of those fields and the resulting bat activity. So this is a cool example where site 5, that line that you're seeing on the top, had higher overall plant diversity. It had higher percent cover of like forbs, so flowering species, greater plant richness. And so what that's starting to tell us is maybe there's something going on here with the relationship between how diverse a field is, because that's supporting more insects that bats are going to depend on for their food. So again, we're in the early days with this study. We only have 1 season of data under our belts, but we're really looking forward to adding on more sites and expanding this in the year ahead. So our team is really excited to announce that we've gotten newly awarded funding from the National Geographic Society this year that's allowing us to amplify these outreach efforts and research efforts in 2026. So again, we're going to expand this research at probably 16 new locations this year. So I'm really excited to just look at more field diversity and different landscapes and see what kind of what differences we're seeing with these relationships as we increase our sample size. But also we're doing a lot more outreach events. So I know we're only in March right now, but I'm already thinking ahead to the summer right now. So if you all are ever interested in joining our team at an evening bat walk, we're planning on hosting 4 this summer. So if that's something that's interesting, consider signing up for the Virginia Working Landscapes newsletter or our social media accounts. We'll be putting all the information out there on those platforms. We'll be hosting a few events in our community where we will kind of have an informal lecture outside, but also walk around at night and use some monitoring devices to see if we can identify some bats. So I want to talk for a few minutes about some ways that you can support bat conservation at home. And I actually put by the door as you guys came in a couple handouts with this information. So if you didn't grab one, be sure to grab one on your way out, because there's a lot of actually pretty easy ways that you can support bat conservation efforts at home. One way is to install a bat box, and I actually have an example one right here. I'd be happy to chat with you more about this later. But there are some specifics about the way you want to install these. They do have to be put fairly high up, so at least 12 feet up in the air. Typically, they're better mounted on like a pole or the side of a structure like a barn. You don't want to put them on a tree because the bats are just a little bit too susceptible to predation there. There's also just other specifics like the color, the direction it's facing to get the right amount of heat retention. So if you want to install that box, let's chat more about it, because I can definitely point you towards some resources that will help with that. Another thing is to turn off lights at night. So a lot of research has shown that artificial lighting can really disrupt bat foraging activity. So using things like filtered or down-shielded lights can really help, because bats really depend on the natural moonlight illumination to dictate their foraging patterns. So kind of reducing that, or at least having lights that go off on a timer, can be really helpful. Keeping cats indoors. I know we hear this a lot, but cats are predators of bats, birds, many small animals. So easy way to help with that is to just keep cats inside. Protecting water quality. So bats depend on aquatic invertebrates and insects. So keeping these insects safe at all stages of the life cycle can be really critical for protecting their food base. Leaving the leaf litter. I know we talk about this a lot, kind of, when it's fall, people are thinking about raking up their yards, but leaving the leaf litter actually benefits bats, because some species like eastern red bats that we talked about here in Virginia will actually overwinter under the leaf litter. So they might drop down from being roosting in those foliage, kind of hanging like a dead leaf. They'll drop down, it might get compacted with snow cover, and they are actually staying warm and insulated under the leaf litter. So by leaving that, keeping more wild areas of your yard can actually provide them with overwintering habitat. Planting native plants. I know we talk about this a lot. It's good for supporting biodiversity in many ways, but I think the biggest thing here is that planting more native plants supports a more diverse insect base, which bats depend upon. Reducing or eliminating pesticide use is really important. Again, bats are our best natural source of pest control. And leaving snags standing is important. So a snag is a standing dead tree, and these provide really important roosting habitat, not just for bats, but for many other wildlife species as well. So if these are not posing a threat to the safety of the structure or anything on your property, just leave them standing, because they are great habitat for insects, mammals, woodpeckers. A lot of animals will use these. So leave them out on the landscape. It really helps. If you find a bat that needs help, maybe you see something that's grounded, it's acting funny, it's got, an obvious injury. We're lucky here in Virginia to have several great resources. We've got the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center, we've got the Wildlife Center of Virginia, and then Bat Conservation and Rescue also have awesome trained rehabbers who can help bats or just give you advice over the phone about what to do in given situations. I'll talk a second about how you can observe bats at home. What I'm holding here is a handheld ultrasonic microphone. These are cool. They're only like 2 inches large, but they actually plug into your cell phone. So something like an iPad or a cell phone that has a USB-C port, you can plug that into your device and essentially turn that into an ultrasonic bat recording device. So the company that makes these, it's called Wildlife Acoustics. This is what we'll be using on all of our summer bat walks. So it's really cool. You can plug this in. You've seen the bats flying up ahead. You point it right at the bat, and then this app that it connects to gives you its 2 most likely guesses of what species is flying over. And again, that's based on those unique echolocation calls. So I'll have this device up here if you'd like to come up and see if it's compatible with your phone. But these are a lot of fun to use, so very user friendly too. They cost about 180. So I know that's a little steep, but honestly, in kind of the range of bat detectors, that is way on the low end. So this is as cheap as it's gonna get. They're really fun devices to use though. So more resources about things that we've talked about tonight. I want to refer you to Bat Conservation International. Again, a lot of our local rehab centers and the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. All of these local partners have a wealth of information about supporting bats. And that is all I have for you all this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Happy to take questions. We have time.
We have time for a few questions, and each question that's not on the Zoom, but I'm going to act like it is, because why not? I mean, what's the advantage of doing this job? If you've got a bunch of individual bats from the same species, all echolocating at the same time, how do they not get overwhelmed with the others in the flock?
That's a great question. I think these animals know how to kind of divide their space use in the environment. And so I don't think we would typically see a lot of bats tightly foraging together. I think when they emerge from their roost, they're going to spread out. These bats will actually travel a couple miles to forage every night. So they've got their preferred feeding locations. And I think they just kind of naturally sort themselves out, but they're not all bumping into each other foraging on the landscape.
With the human beings, learn from what's happening.
Right.
Other questions? I've got a few that actually are legitimately on the Zoom. Mike.
On the white nose syndrome, is that primarily cave bats, cave roosting bats?
That's right. And it's just due to the conducive environment for the fungus growing. So we're not really seeing that with like the tree bats, the hoary red, the Eastern red bats. It's more of those cave roosting species. So a lot of the myotis species.
Thank you.
Is there a good or bad time to mow if you have a big meadow, or to bush hog to benefit bats?
And let's pair that with a question that came from on Zoom. When can you safely rake leaves? So there's the mowing question, and when can you safely rake leaves? Assuming that most people aren't like me and just leave them all the time, and I claim that it's okay. I can use it.
I'll kind of separate those in my mind, kind of two different questions, but I'm actually hoping this research leads to some more answers with that question. So ideally, supporting insects during the periods that they're going to be using these habitats, allowing them to have a vegetation structure for forage, for shelter, that's directly supporting bats. So I think a lot of the recommendations that scientists make to kind of delay your hay cutting, your field maintenance, maybe if you have a field that's managed just once a year, doing that in kind of late February, early March, those could be optimal time periods for supporting multiple wildlife taxa. And I think some of the research that I've seen is that directly supports bats as well. But I think with these research questions that we're asking, I'm hoping to get more informed answers from that as we kind of pair that with how landowners are specifically managing their fields. We're documenting the timing of cutting, the direct species composition that's there. So I'm hoping we're going to be able to learn a lot more and then share that with the community. So really excellent question. My head is right there with you.
Thanks.
On leaves?
Sorry. And the leaf question. So I think with leaving a layer of leaves, even if you can't do it, across your whole yard, even just setting aside, a somewhat wild area to kind of leave that structure intact, it's supplying not just kind of overwintering habitat for bats, but you're directly protecting their insect prey base. So we've got insects overwintering it, or maybe they're in hollow stems. So delaying that until the weather is really consistently warming up and insects are starting to emerge, that can be a good time to kind of think about managing and maybe spreading out those areas. Great question.
Tony, I think you were next.
I was thinking about the different types of agriculture we have here in Rappahannock County. Sometimes they make hay, sometimes they raise cattle. Which type of agricultural environment favors bats the most?
That is what we're hoping to answer with some of this research. That's a great question. And so I'm really interested in surveying different agricultural practices. So not all fields that are managed the same way. I'm interested in hay fields and cattle pastures, post-agricultural, fallow fields. Some folks have even planted wildflower meadows. I'm interested in all the above because I'm not sure if there is kind of a direct, clear-cut answer to that. I think what we'll learn from that is how the plant diversity impacts insect abundance. And so that's directly relating to bats' preferences for their foraging patterns. So I'm hoping in a year or two, as we, get more sites on our research list, we can start to answer some of those questions. But that's really what I'm thinking about. So thank you for asking that.
And here's a follow-up, David, I'll be with you. Let me ask this one question. It comes from Laura, and it's a follow-up on the bat box. When she put up a bluebird box within 24 hours, bluebirds, and she's got a bat box that's been up for a year.
Oh, yeah.
Is she doing something wrong? Should she move it? Should she just call you?
Great question. And I get this one a lot. Bat houses can be pretty hit or miss. Honestly, some people put them up and they never see them become occupied. Some of that is related to, I think, how closely folks follow the installation guidelines, because there really are a lot of specifics with these and they're not similar to bird boxes. But honestly, if bats have preferred natural roosting habitat on the landscape, so if they've got the snags out there, if they've got a lot of trees, large diameter trees, if there's a great barn there, they're going to prefer these other natural roost sources, and they may never take up residence in a bat box. So what a lot of scientists say is that these bat boxes tend to do best if you have to do a humane eviction from a structure. So let's say you've got a big colony of bats in like an attic or a barn, and you need to get them out, seal up all the cracks. It sometimes can work well to put the bat box up on the side of that structure. So when bats end up returning to that, they might take up residence in the artificial roost instead. So they can be hit or miss, but I'd love to hear from folks, personal experiences anytime of what seems to work well or not.
So you may be getting an email.
That's okay.
David.
Question about echolocation. What about its evolutionary history, and why did it evolve? Why did bats develop that skill, but no other animals?
Some other animals actually do echolocate. So great question. We actually see some mammals do that. So shrews actually echolocate. So we do see that acoustic adaptation in several different taxa, and they likely evolve in different pathways because some of these taxa are very different. So yeah, I encourage you to look more into the other species that echolocate. But some of them, I believe it's the short-tailed shrew. So that's another species we have in Virginia, will produce kind of echolocation pulses to navigate. But yeah, it's an interesting adaptation.
What were they adapting to? Why would a mammal develop an echolocation skill? What is the evolutionary chain of result?
Relates to their prey source. So a lot of the bats that do this are insectivorous bats. And so they are flying around, they're nocturnal predators in a nighttime environment where vision may be reduced. And they're going after really tiny insect prey. And so I think that was likely a driver of that evolution, of that strategy, because it gives them another adaptation to zone in on that object that could be moving very fast, very small, in a potentially very cluttered environment.
We could also ask what would cause them to get their fingers on the end of the wings, which is another cool aerodynamic adaptation. And I just think it's fabulous.
Dolphins,
Whales.
But a follow-up question that Emily asks, did bat change call frequency or intensity in light versus dark or other variable environments?
That is an excellent question, and yes, they do. So a lot of their echolocation characteristics are directly related to the type of environment. And we see this with some of these spectrograms that we look at. So some bats will produce really like long pulses, potentially at a lower frequency, because that sound is traveling farther through a more open environment. But that's going to change if that same bat is foraging in a super cluttered environment. So if it's just come out of its tree, it's in the middle of the woods, it's super cluttered, it's going to change the steepness of those calls, the frequency range, how fast it's coming out. And so that can make it kind of tough actually to identify these bats, because they might have a call that looks very different in one environment compared to another one. So that's part of the fun of the science behind bioacoustics, is learning those differences and kind of thinking about the environment that they're in and what effect that might be having on the bat call pulses.
And we have time for one more question. And Ed recommends on Zoom bat box resource from Canada, which I'll share that link.
Great.
How do you protect from ticks when you're out in the field at night?
The tough one. Oh my gosh.
Same way you catch her.
ticks and mosquitoes and lots of things that get all of us biologists. I think we use a combination of insect repellent and also permethrin to treat our clothing. We found that to be really effective because permethrin can stay on clothing, your pants, your backpacks, your boots, and through multiple washes. And so all our teams had a lot of good luck with using those products. And then we just do really good tick checks when we get home because these ticks are small and problematic. So that's really a thing for day or night field work that we have to be careful with.
Okay, I said one more question, but Sylvia, how can I turn it on?
You were talking about the white nose fungus and it appeared, I think, in 2005 or 6.
2006.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you know why, how, where it came from?
There's a lot of uncertainty with that, but the thought is that it likely originated in Europe. And so the bats that roost in the caves over there are not as affected by it, but it was thought that it was brought over. I don't know if scientists are exactly sure how it was, but it was introduced likely from Europe to New York.
Oh, just wait.
So wrapping up, three things. One, next month, same time, same station, we'll be doing owls, which is, they're almost as cool as bats. They don't have fingers on the end of their wings, but they're still pretty cool. RAC, the Rappahannock Association for Arts and Community, and RLEP are going to be partnering on another presentation about art in the dark skies of Rappahannock. That's April 20th? 20th. If you're an RLEP member, you will get noticed. If you are not, you will be left out in the cold, and nobody will love you. Final comment for those of you that frequent the speaker series, or indeed a lot of our RLEP events, or indeed a lot of the events that all the naturalist organizations in the county pursue. Turn off your lights. Keep the water clean. Plant native plants. You reduce the impact of pesticides. You might see a pattern developing here. We talked about that every time we've had a session, and we will talk about that again next time when we talk about owls, because all the critters need those kinds of things, and we're very, very lucky to have a place where we can help them out. Erin, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we lose the room at 8 o'clock, so I'll get increasingly grumpy as we start to get close to it. But as we clean up the chairs, you can mob Erin and ask her all the questions you were too embarrassed to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.